Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader, and my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So if you've been listening to the podcast for the last couple of weeks, and if you saw the title of today's episode, you might be asking yourself, what is going on with all of these top 10 lists? Well, 2 weeks ago on episode 33, I shared with you what, in my opinion, are the top 10 leadership books for private school leaders. And then last week on episode 34, I shared with you, again, in my opinion, the top 10 time management and productivity books for private school leaders. And so this week, we're going to talk about the top 10 TED Talks that every private school leader should watch. So I promise that this is the last countdown for a while. I've kind of been on a countdown kick, but I just wanted to start today's episode by telling you that I love TED Talks. I just love TED Talks. They are 18 minutes or less. They are really, really smart people with really interesting ideas, and usually they put it together in a package that is very thought-provoking and makes you stop and really think about some things, and maybe think about some things or be exposed to some things that I've never thought about before. But I also want to tell you a little secret about myself, and I'm not sure that I've shared this with anyone outside of my family. But for about the last 20 years, it has been on my bucket list to give a TED Talk. Now, I have no idea how one goes about being selected to give a TED Talk, but it's been on my bucket list. And at first it was an ego thing, and to be honest, it probably still is an ego thing. But I just think it would be really cool to do. And so I'm just putting that out there into the universe that I want to give a TED Talk someday. But you've already heard me say that I think that TED Talks are awesome, and I've watched a lot of them over the years. And so what I've done is curated 10 TED Talks that I think are the best for private school leaders to watch. So we are going to count them down. I'll tell you a little bit about each one, and then I'll tell you why I think that applies to you as you lead your school. But before we jump into that, I wanted to let you know that I've created a free resource for you called The Top 6 Ways to Protect Your School from a Lawsuit. This is a 10-page PDF that will help you to keep your staff and students safe and help keep your school out of court. Litigation is expensive, time-consuming, and very stressful, and this common sense guide will help you be more intentional and proactive when it comes to protecting your private school. And you can grab the top 6 ways to protect your school from a lawsuit at theprivateschoolleader.com/lawsuit. Just a way to thank you for listening to the podcast. And then one last thing, I would love to hear from you if you are getting value from the podcast. And my email address is mark.o.minkus@gmail.com. That's mark.o.minkus@gmail.com. And just let me know how it's going with a new strategy that you picked up, or maybe one of these books that you've read, or even a TED Talk that you watched. And also maybe let me know what your biggest pain point is right now, and that could turn into a future episode. And I really appreciate you reaching out to me, mark.o.minkus@gmail.com, so that I can better serve you in future episodes. And then the last thing before we start our countdown is I just want to remind you, I'm about to list off 10 TED Talks. You're probably multitasking, walking the dog or driving or doing work around the house or working out. I don't want you to feel like you have to write this stuff down. And so all of this will be in the link, or the links for all of these TED Talks will be in the show notes. And you can find the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 35. And like I said, you'll go there, all the links will be there, and it'll be easy for you to be able to watch one or more of these TED Talks if you choose to do that. All right, let's count them down. Number 1, How Great Leaders Inspire Action by Simon Sinek. How Great Leaders Inspire Action by Simon Sinek. So I want to tell you why this TED Talk is important, but I want to tell you something else as to why several of these TED Talks are important, and it has to do with what we did on episode 33 and episode 34. So let me explain. So every year at our school, when we have our spring musical, a few days before opening night, we have a sneak peek. And we invite the whole school up to the gym where the stage is, and they perform, the cast and crew, they perform 2 songs from the musical. And so it's a sneak peek, and then kids see it and they're so excited about it, whether it's Beauty and the Beast Jr. or whatever the show might be. And then they come and watch one of the shows. Well, the reason I'm talking about sneak peeks is because on this list, there are probably about 6 of these TED Talks that are kind of a sneak peek for one of the books that was listed either as top 10 leadership books in episode 33 or top 10 productivity books in episode 34. And this first one is an example of that. So for example, this TED Talk by Simon Sinek, it's 18 minutes long, but it's kind of a sneak peek for his book, Start With Why. So again, you may have listened to one or both of those episodes, and you may be thinking, well, do I really want to buy this book, or do I really want to check out this book at my library? Well, there are going to be multiple TED Talks on this list that I said, like I said, that are sneak peeks for this person, this author, and then you can maybe get a feel for their big idea and then decide if you want to buy that book. So speaking of big ideas, for Simon Sinek, How Great Leaders Inspire Action, the big idea is the golden circle. And this is the 4th most watched TED Talk of all time. And the golden circle is why in the center, what is the next circle out, and then how is the 3rd circle out. And so really, the big idea from this TED Talk is that if we're going to do something difficult, and let's face it, what we do is a very, very difficult job, and it's an emotional job. And if we're going to do something that's very difficult, we need to have a really compelling reason why we do what we do. And way back in episode 1, I talked to you about how I came up with my compelling why. And my why is throwing starfish, and I write that at the top of my task list every single day. And you can go back and listen to episode 1 for that story. But I just want you to hear this. No parent, no paycheck, no board president, no head of school is a big enough reason why for you to sustainably do this very, very difficult job that you have as a private school leader. There's no parent, no paycheck, no board president, no head of school, no boss, no pressure of that type that is going to make it in a sustainable way that you are able to successfully do your job. And so it has to be internal, it has to be personal, it has to be the passion, and it's helpful to be able to define what is that just cause, what is that big reason why, that compelling reason why you do what you do. And our first TED Talk, How Great Leaders Inspire Action by Simon Sinek, can help you get some clarity on that. All right, on to number 2. Now, number 2 is called How a Jar Can Change the Way You Lead and Serve by Allison Fett. And this is just a little nugget of a TEDx talk that I found a few years back. And when I say it's a little nugget, I mean that it's not on the list of most watched. It's not a famous author. She is a vice president at a credit union, I think is her background. But she gives a very simple message using a jar with 7 things in the jar to teach about servant leadership. And the title, How a Jar Can Change the Way You Lead and Serve, is exactly what this TED Talk is. And so I just love the imagery and the clear explanation, lots of clear application and stories. And you know by now, if you've been listening to the podcast, that servant leadership is my preferred leadership style, that I sign off every episode by saying, serve first, lead second, make a difference. And this is a very simple and straightforward, but also powerful message from Ali Fett that can give you a little summary, a little introduction in a powerful way to servant leadership, and try to be more intentional about adopting that perhaps. So number 2, TED Talk for private school leaders, How a Jar Can Change the Way You Lead and Serve by Ali Fett. Okay, let's jump to number 3 and another TED Talk by Simon Sinek. This one is called How Good Leaders Make You Feel Safe. How Good Leaders Make You Feel Safe. So again, another sneak peek here for a book on the top 10 leadership books. Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek is on that list from episode 33. And again, this can give you a glimpse into his big idea that then he elaborates on in that book. And I'm not going to do this for most of the TED Talks on this list, but I do have a few quotes from him. So let me give you a summary real quick, and then I'll give you 3 quick quotes from the TED Talk, because I think that they just speak for themselves. So in this TED Talk, I took this from the summary. Simon Sinek believes leaders should be more than just authority figures. To earn the trust, respect, and cooperation of their teams, leaders should first make selfless sacrifices and put the needs of their people around them ahead of their own. So that should sound familiar. That sounds like servant leadership to me. But Leaders Eat Last is all about the idea of putting yourself second, making sacrifices for your team, and earning their trust and building cooperation among your team in that way. And so a couple of quotes from this TED Talk that Simon Sinek says, quote, "When people feel safe and protected by the leadership in an organization, the natural reaction is to trust and cooperate," end quote. So people want to feel safe at work. And in an organization, they are more likely to trust and cooperate if they feel safe. And another quote, "Great leaders should never sacrifice the people to save the numbers. They would sooner sacrifice the numbers to save the people," end quote. And then finally, quote, "Leadership is a choice. It is not a rank," end quote. So the idea of positional leadership, he's saying it's not a rank. He does talk a little about the military, a couple of examples from the military about Leaders Eat Last, not only the book, but also here in this TED Talk. And so I just think it's a really beautiful and brief glimpse into building trust instead of relying on positional authority at your private school. And so number 3 on our list of the top 10 TED Talks that every private school leader should watch is How Good Leaders Make You Feel Safe by Simon Sinek. All right, let's move on to number 4. And this is our first TED Talk that's about time management. It won't be the last. And so this one is called How to Gain Control of Your Free Time by Laura Vanderkam. And again, another sneak peek. Last week, episode 34, on the top 10 productivity books, near the top of that list was a book called 168 Hours by Laura Vanderkam. And I just love Laura Vanderkam's work, whether it's a TED Talk or a book. And so her big idea, I'm going to give you 2 big ideas from this TED Talk, is that if we're more intentional about our calendar and we claim the white space for our priorities, then we will be spending less time on everyone else's priorities. And then another big idea is to visualize next year's year-end review today. And so if a year from now you were sitting down with your head of school or your board president and you're having your year-end review, what would they say about your accomplishments? What would that year look like? What would you have done or said or built, or what would be the things that you would be talking about if you had an awesome year-end review 1 year from today? And then to reverse engineer that by figuring out, well, what are the things I need to do to get to that point, and then schedule them into your calendar. And I just want to pause and acknowledge, anytime that we talk about time management, I feel like I need to acknowledge the reality that our jobs are extremely unpredictable, and that if a kid hits a kid at recess, or if the heat stops working, or if you get a phone call from an angry parent, that our days go sideways. And the whole idea of time management and productivity might make some private school leaders kind of roll their eyes, but being more intentional about it can make a huge difference. And I'm proof of that. I used to just kind of go with the flow and not really get my priorities accomplished, and then be working on them late into the night and on the weekends. But I just have to say that Laura Vanderkam's work, her TED Talk, and her couple of books have probably had the most influence on my time management practice, the most of any specific author. So TED Talk number 4, How to Gain Control of Your Free Time by Laura Vanderkam. And speaking of my time management practice, the second biggest impact is from David Allen. And number 5 is a TED Talk by David Allen called The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. And again, this is another sneak peek on the productivity books, the top 10 in episode 34. Getting Things Done by David Allen was the number 1 book on that countdown. And so he actually has 3 TED Talks, but the one called The Art of Stress-Free Productivity was his first, and really kind of delved into the big ideas that he gets into in his book, Getting Things Done. And so a couple big ideas there are that you need to capture everything in a reliable way. And so whether that is writing it down or putting it in a Google Doc, and he talks about how our brains hate open loops, and that open loops cause stress. And so the things that he talks about are to, number 1, capture, number 2, direct, and number 3, curate. And it's difficult to go into that in a 2-minute preview of a TED Talk, but the idea is that anything, this is a quote, anything that does not belong where it is, the way it is an open loop, which will be pulling on your attention if it's not appropriately managed. End quote. So what David Allen talks about is capturing things in a reliable place, and then using intentionality to decide which things get your attention first, which things don't get your attention until later, or maybe not at all, and how to close those open loops. And again, he talks about how the brain is wonderful at coming up with ideas and creating things, but the brain is a terrible office. And too many of us are trying to use our brain like an office or like a filing cabinet, and really our brain should be used as a workspace or a makerspace. So number 5 on the list is The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. All right, so we're counting down the top 10 TED Talks that every private school leader should watch, and we're up to number 6. And this TED Talk is called The Power of Believing That You Can Improve by Carol Dweck. So back in 2016 at my school, we intentionally implemented growth mindset in our intermediate school with 4th and 5th grade. And that went so well that the following year in 2017, we implemented it intentionally in our middle school, and it absolutely transformed our school. And I'm a huge believer in growth mindset, and I've seen it in action, how it changes lives. And in this podcast, we have episode 4 is all about growth mindset, and I have created a plug and play PD for you to use with your teachers for free. And I will link that in the show notes, but you can also find All of that at theprivateschoolleader.com/resources. But it's a 45-minute video webinar with guided notes that talks all about how to implement growth mindset at your school. It talks about what is it and what are examples of it, but also then how to implement it at your school for free or extremely low cost. And going back to the summer of 2016, when I was researching and trying to figure out like what did we need at our school, because we were seeing a lack of resilience and learned helplessness with our 4th and 5th graders, is the first thing I came across was Angela Lee Duckworth's TED Talk on grit. But then the second one was this one from Carol Dweck. And basically the bottom line with growth mindset is Dweck, a Stanford University professor, 30 years of research, that she believes that how much we learn is influenced by what we believe about how we learn. And so fixed mindset is people who believe that we get a certain amount of intelligence and ability at birth, and that's fixed. And so a certain amount of math ability or athletic ability or musical talent. And so if we get a fixed amount at birth, then why bother trying to grow in that area? We can just shut down and say, I'm not good at that, or I'm not a math person, or I'm not an athlete. A growth mindset, on the other hand, is that we believe that the way that a person learns is by trying things, failing, putting forth effort, putting forth a different strategy, stamina, resilience, treating the brain like a muscle. And so I'm telling you things that most of you already know as far as growth mindset, but if you've even thought a little bit about how this could be implemented at your school and how it can make a difference, let's face it, our private schools, we deal with a lot of kids who are all tangled up in academic performance anxiety, and that their self-worth, they view it through the lens of their grades. And I've seen it with my own eyes that there's a better way. And so this TED Talk is a great 10-minute introduction to that. And then that might lead to you checking out some of the resources that I mentioned, episode 4 of this podcast, as well as the Plug and Play PD. And I'll link all of that in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 35. All right, on to number 7. How to Multiply Your Time by Rory Vaden. And yes, this is another sneak peek for not one, but 2 productivity books that were on the top 10 list last episode 34. So Rory Vaden made that list twice, once with his book Procrastinate on Purpose, and the other book Take the Stairs. And so How to Multiply Your Time is really a kind of a summary of Take the Stairs, but it's a good introduction to him as a person, and then you might be interested in him as an author. But I'll give you the big idea. He has you picture a funnel, and then there's a task that drops in the top of the funnel. And then you start asking yourself some questions. Can I eliminate this task? No. Can I automate this task? If the answer is no, then you ask, can I delegate this task? And if the answer is no, then can I procrastinate on purpose with this task? And if the answer is no, then it goes back to the top of the tunnel. But most tasks get taken care of at either eliminate, automate, delegate, or procrastinate. And so, again, it's very simple. It's very straightforward. It's easy to apply. He's very entertaining. And I just really recommend Rory Vaden as an author and some of the big ideas that he has. And you can check those out. You can get an introduction to Rory Vaden by watching the TED Talk, How to Multiply Your Time. And that brings us up to number 8. And number 8 is actually the most watched TED Talk in history by a lot. And that is Do Schools Kill Creativity by Sir Ken Robinson. Now, if you've seen any TED Talks, you've probably seen this one. And I'll just run through the 3 key ideas quickly since you've probably already seen it. If you haven't, it's a great one to watch. If you haven't seen it in a while, it's probably time for a rewatch. But key idea number 1, again, according to Sir Ken Robinson, key idea number 1, the education system prioritizes academic subjects like math and science while neglecting creative and artistic pursuits, which leads to quote unquote the hierarchy of subjects. Key idea number 2, this narrow focus ignores the diversity of intelligence, which can alienate students with different talents and strengths, leading to disengagement and underachievement. And then key idea number 3 is we should try to foster creativity and curiosity in children, not only for their personal development, but also for the betterment of society. So, as I said a moment ago, if you haven't watched this one in a while, it's probably a good one to revisit. And it is called Do Schools Kill Creativity by Sir Ken Robinson. And that brings us up to number 9, which is called How to Stop Screwing Yourself Over by Mel Robbins. Now, the title of that TED Talk will give you a little introduction as to the kind of person that Mel Robbins is. She's blunt, she's brash, she's a straight shooter, she tells it like it is. And I really love this TED Talk, and I've read some books by her, and she just really gets straight to the point. It is the 19th most watched TED Talk of all time, and a couple of her big ideas are, she talks about the F word. And of course, everyone thinks they know what the F word is, but she really says that the F word is fine. F-I-N-E. When someone asks you, how are you doing? Fine. How are things at home? Fine. How's things going with your kids? Fine. And so we're stuck in fine. And she talks about how we're on autopilot. We have two modes. We have two things that go on the inside: autopilot and the emergency brake. And so we're on autopilot, just kind of doing our thing, and we have our routines that we do in the morning and then with work and then after school and in the evening, and we're just kind of on autopilot. And she talks about how you've probably had this experience where you drive to work and you get there and you don't really remember driving to work. You are on autopilot. And so we kind of go through life that way, according to Mel Robbins, in a lot of ways. But then all of a sudden something comes up, and then we yank the emergency brake. And that's our fight or flight that's kicking in to keep us safe. But she puts forth how she believes that actually keeps us from getting the things that we want in life and keeps us stuck in quote unquote fine, or stuck on autopilot. And so this TED Talk, she tells us how to move from fine to getting what you want in life. And I know that sounds a little bit like an infomercial, but I really believe that you watching this TED Talk would be time well spent, and especially as it relates to changing up some things in our lives outside of school, more so than just at work. And then the big thing I would say is that if you are feeling stuck, if that phrase, if I say, are you feeling stuck, and that resonates with you, I would say this is the TED Talk to watch. So whether it's in your personal life or at school, if you're just feeling stuck, I would recommend watching number 9, How to Stop Screwing Yourself Over by Mel Robbins. And that brings us to number 10. And we have a tie for number 10 because I couldn't just settle on 10. I had to have 11. So we have a tie at number 10. The first one is called How to Avoid Death by PowerPoint by David J.P. Phillips. Now, we've all sat through presentations that had terrible PowerPoints, and this TED Talk is exactly what it says, How to Avoid Death by PowerPoint. And the TED Talk itself, as you might expect, is entertaining and brief and fast-paced, but it will take your PowerPoint presentations and make them so much better. And one of the things I love about this TED Talk is that he uses this brain science behind working memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, how the eyes work and talk to the brain, all of the different things that go into what we see and what we remember. The brain science behind that is what informs his 6 points about how to make an excellent PowerPoint. And my social studies teacher at my school, he actually shows this TED Talk to all of his middle school students once a year near the beginning of the year, and then holds them accountable to these 6 points on the TED Talk, on the PowerPoints during the school year when they give presentations in social studies class. So sometimes we have to give presentations. A lot of times it's not our favorite thing to do, but this is a short TED Talk that will make your PowerPoints way more interesting, and your audience will retain way more of what you say. And then the other number 10, we have a tie for number 10, is How to Speak So That People Will Listen by Julian Treasure. And speaking of giving presentations, we have to talk a lot in public. And this is about how to speak so that people will listen. And it's not just when we're giving a presentation, but all of the different spaces and times where we speak. We're at a picnic, or we're at a basketball game, or we're at a concert. We're in a meeting with our team. We're in a meeting with a parent one-on-one. We're in casual conversation. All of the different times and spaces where we need to speak, that we are able to, with this TED Talk, Julian Treasure, speak so that people will listen. And I just want to add that I know that many of us, whether we're introverts or not, are very uncomfortable with this part of leadership. And it's a necessary part of leadership, the public speaking part and the public social interactions part. But if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, then this is definitely a TED Talk that's worth your time. It's short, it's fast-paced, it's actionable, and I really believe it would give you a big return on your time investment. So that's the list. So let's just run it down one more time. Our big takeaways today are the top 10 TED Talks that every private school leader should watch. Number 1, How Great Leaders Inspire Action by Simon Sinek. Number 2, How a Jar Can Change the Way You Lead and Serve by Ali Fett. Number 3, How Good Leaders Make You Feel Safe by Simon Sinek. Number 4, How to Gain Control of Your Free Time by Laura Vanderkam. Number 5, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen. Number 6, The Power of Believing That You Can Improve by Carol Dweck. Number 7, How to Multiply Your Time by Rory Vaden. Number 8, Do Schools Kill Creativity by Sir Ken Robinson. Number 9, How to Stop Screwing Yourself Over by Mel Robbins. And a tie for number 10 between How to Avoid Death by PowerPoint by David J.P. Phillips. And also at number 10, How to Speak So That People Will Listen by Julian Treasure. And I like to end every episode with a call to action. And your call to action in the next week, I would like for you to watch 2 of these TED Talks and write down one big idea from each TED Talk that you can apply to how you lead your school. So in the next week, pick 2. And these TED Talks are anywhere from 9 minutes. I think the longest is 18 minutes. 2 TED Talks in the next week. Write down one big idea from each TED Talk that will help you lead your school. And just to wrap it up, I want to give you a quick reminder that I have another free guide for you, and this one is called 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. We know that working with parents is part of the job, and most of our parents are great, but some of them can be very demanding and emotional and difficult. And this guide will give you the tools you need to build better relationships and have better meetings with the difficult parents at your school. So go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parents to grab that free guide called 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. And if you're getting value from the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. My email is mark.o.minkus@gmail.com. Please subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And show notes for today's episode are found at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 35. And everything is there for you. All you have to do is go there and click on the links to the TED Talks. And this podcast can be found on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm on Instagram at The Private School Leader or Twitter at The PS Leader. And if you got value from this episode, I would just love it if you would share with another leader at your school or someone that you perceive to be an aspiring leader at your school, and hopefully they can gain value from it as well. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I want to say I appreciate you and all the hard work that you're doing to change lives at your school. Thank you so much for taking some of your precious time to join me here today, and I'll see you next time on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.